5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Dangerzone. I have the pleasure today of sitting down with a good friend of mine, Dawn. She is the founder and curator of Prism Yoga, and she is involved in a couple things. She's a physical trainer, and she does yoga, strength training. She's into meditation, veganism, body psychology, reintegration of mind and body, and a lifting lover, of course.
Of course.
So, really excited to finally, we've been trying to sit down and talk for quite a while.
Couple of years.
Yeah, and get a podcast in. So, excited that we're finally doing that. This is the first podcast back in the home studio since I've fried my board in Denmark, and I have finally replaced everything and got everything situated. So it's awesome that you're the first person to be able to sort of break in the new podcast setup. So this should be fun. Real quick, people can find you on Instagram and Facebook at prism_yoga. Mm-hmm. You have a website, www.prism-yoga.com, and you can find her on YouTube if you search for Prism Yoga. So that seems like a good place to start. How did you come to be the founder of Prism Yoga?
Prism Yoga actually started to take shape about 18 years ago, and it was steeped in the roots of bringing awareness to first responders to help them reintegrate mind and body. So much of what they see and what they do, you can't unsee and you can't undo, and it's stuffed. So they need a means to be able to tap into that and push that through. And that's really where the idea and the notion of Prism Yoga was born. And the idea behind the name is Prism. It brings the 7 color spectrums in. The chakra system is also based on those 7 color spectrums. Mm-hmm. Red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, blue, indigo, violet. So I wanted to keep it relatively mainstream, so I chose Prism over chakra. And I do like the shape of the triangle. It's masculine and it's a little mysterious. So that's the foundation of Prism Yoga. How it's morphed from there has turned into a lot of different things over all of those 18 years. And since then, it has turned into some body psychology for people. Some of the classes that I teach and the privates aren't even anything to do with the physical asanas. It has more to do with getting people in touch with, do you feel tightness here? Do you feel numbness here? Do you feel tingling here? Getting people in touch with, if you feel something in your body, that is your body's language talking to you. Mm-hmm. You don't want to drown it out. You don't want to silence it with drugs. You want to be able to let that body communicate, because if it starts yelling at you, you've got a real problem on your hands. So you want to be able to hear it when it's whispering. So that's really the main idea behind Prism Yoga.
So I waited until my body was yelling at me.
A lot of us do.
And having experiences very close to that of first responders and stuff, kind of how you got started with Prism Yoga, it makes sense how our paths crossed and I got into Prism Yoga, but I didn't start with Prism Yoga, and it was those alarm bells going off in my body that I was ignoring for a really long time that I finally had to pay attention to. And it was coming back from my second deployment when I got really bad blast wave concussions on that deployment. And I started to change a lot in my brain, who I was. And I felt distance from other people. Mm-hmm. And so me being a people person, liking to talk to people, I realized I needed to do something drastic to like change this. Like, this is not okay. And so I started tuning into my body. And for me, yoga came up sort of in my awareness, or, you know, in my gut feeling, like for whatever reason, it was like, hey, that seems like the right thing to do. My reasons for doing it, however, were probably more the typical, I think, preconceived notions about yoga, which is like, I'm going to get some stretching in, and I'm like, oh man, I'm pretty tight after all these deployments, and like carrying all these heavy loads. Like I could probably deal with some stretching.
Right.
And then being in a group of people doing something together on sort of like the same level, for whatever reason in my mind, I thought like that would help me sort of connect with other people sort of doing the same thing together. I wouldn't have to talk with them. I wouldn't have to interact, but we'll like all be sort of on the same energy wavelength.
Right. I call that the grandfather clock syndrome. So if I've got a group of 20, 30, 40, 50 people together, about 20 to 30 minutes into the practice, the whole room just kind of starts to tick like grandfather clocks. They all sync up together. We all sync up together. Even myself as the instructor or the guide sync up with the students. It's a pretty profound moment when everybody syncs up together. So there is a lot of synergy when you start practicing with a group.
Yeah. And so I went to like a 24-hour fitness like yoga class, and it was awesome for an introduction into it, but I was missing still a lot of the piece of what Prism Yoga is doing and what you're talking about. And so it really helped me sort of get in touch with my breath early on, and that kind of led into meditation and other things. But it wasn't until I did Prism Yoga with you, I felt like it was like, okay, this is what yoga is. Like,
you have arrived.
Yeah. And it is so much more it is about that mindful connection to your body, and just understanding how it all works together energetically. And when you've been ignoring this for a long time, it can be tough work.
Oh yeah.
It
is tough work.
It's like a workout. It is a workout.
Yes.
And
yes.
I remember the first time I did Prism Yoga with you, I think I was flying to Colorado or something like that.
I do remember. Yeah, I do remember you were going to be traveling.
And I just remember I was like super sore when I like was flying. I was like, man, is this plane ride like already jacking me up? And then I realized that I was sore from the yoga.
From yoga.
Yeah.
I think you were sore for about 4 days too.
Which I think some people are like, oh man, I'm sore, I should do some yoga. And it's like, well,
yeah,
you should probably just get in tune with your body.
Right. Start listening, learn the language, because it is a language, and it's a foreign language. If you've not been taught at an early age what all of those sensations mean, it's a foreign language once you become an adult.
Yeah. So
you need a guide sometimes to learn your body's language.
Yeah. So I've really enjoyed sort of, starting down, Prism Yoga, because I've done, I guess, several different styles of yoga, if we will. And like before I started doing sort of Prism Yoga with you, I was doing yoga with a friend of mine who he did trauma-based yoga, which is like, I guess the way he was taught was, it seems more like a relaxation. It's more of like focus.
Like a restorative?
Yeah, it's focused more on sort of just being able to relax. People who have, who've been through trauma and they have anxiety and stuff like that. And so it was really sort of focused into that very like specific idea of getting people a chance to like, maybe it wasn't so much focused on like knowing where your body's at and like space and time and everything. It was more of just like a relaxation.
Learning how to let go is also a tough one for adults.
Yeah. But it's just been interesting to see. I had very preconceived notions about yoga before I started. Like one, it's only for women. And like you know, I would basically be a pansy.
My
if
favorite
I, like,
is,
did it.
well, I can't do yoga. Well, why? Because I'm not flexible.
Yeah. What,
I'm like, I mean, okay.
so what would you tell somebody that has that? Because that's something I wanted to talk to you about is like what would you tell somebody who says something like that? Like, well, I'm not flexible, so I can't do yoga.
Sometimes it's going to depend on the energy I'm picking up from that person. And there are times where I'll just be, very direct and say, well, that could be your mind just giving you another excuse to avoid it. If it's not that kind of energy, I'll just remind them, you don't come to the table saying that I'm hungry and then you don't eat the food. I mean, it's counterproductive. So I said, if you're not flexible, then you come to a yoga class. Most of the time, it's just a story that we tell ourselves because we're intimidated, and a lot of people are intimidated. If you look around at a lot of yoga advertisements, you see people doing scorpion pose, you see people doing handstands, you see these really elaborate, very pretty yoga poses, but that's not everyday yoga. That's not anything that's very restorative. It doesn't really bring you back to the self. It's advanced. It challenges someone who's already kind of been there and needs to go to that edge and push. So I remind people, we are here just to get you back in tune with your body. And a lot of times the mind will start telling you things to avoid that. So we need to shut that off and just kind of push you into the class. That's what I try to tell people. Whether they jump in on that, that's on them. But most of the time I found that's just one of the stories that the mind is trying to tell the body to keep it from healing itself. Because yes, the mind will convince you that you don't need to heal yourself.
And you probably see the parallel of that in physical training as well. Because you're a physical trainer. So the people that are adverse to sort of taking that leap to take their life in their own hands and like do something about being out of shape or being unhealthy, there's a lot of things you can do, but it is sort of, I think you brought up a good point, is like the person has to make like the decision to get over their fear or whatever is like hindering them from doing it. I guess my challenge to people would be is if you have an inkling that yoga might be good for you, you should give it a try.
Just go.
Because that's what I did, and it's absolutely changed my life. It's been wonderful for me in so many ways. And it's been this weird, evolution journey of kind of doing it very basically to like different styles. But each time I've done it, there's something that I'm adding sort of to my mind body awareness, like the whole toolbox of that, and sort of building it from living a life before of like 26 years of just completely ignoring what my body's telling me, so it takes a while to sort of unwire that, and
you got to unlearn it, because we're not taught to listen to the body. The thinking mind, the cerebral mind, that is what we're taught to use. Our success is measured, as children based on how our grades are in school. There's no meditation taught. There's no communication really about, well, how are you feeling? Let's discuss that. It's a lot of times, well, boys aren't meant to feel this and girls aren't meant to feel that, and adults are, well, we don't talk about this. So, there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, shaming when it comes to feelings. And, there's this whole, cascade effect of what's going on as people age and they mature and they grow, and they're still in this strange, perpetuating cycle of, what is going on? Why am I still in this place? Or there's blame toward other people. There's projection. There's all of this stuff going on. And so that's where I come in. I'm like, oh, well, let's discuss that feeling. Let's go right there. And that's when they're like, oh, we're right now?
Yeah.
Do we not want to talk about that and like schedule an appointment for it? And I'm like, no, you're feeling it right now. We're going to talk about it right now.
Yeah.
And that's really the best way to do it, is you just grab it as soon as you see it or you feel it or you experience it. You attack it, for lack of a better word.
That's awesome. I actually just saw a news article the other day that some schools are implementing meditation.
Some schools are implementing it.
And-
I'm sure Montessori schools probably do, but I think some, like, regular general schools are starting to bring some of that in.
Apparently, in lieu of a detention, they're doing a meditation.
Oh.
So instead of getting sent to detention, you get sent to meditation.
That's awesome.
Which, to me, I'm just like, had this light bulb. I'm like, wow, that is such a good idea.
Yeah.
Instead of having kids go to this like thing that, is disciplinary, everybody else views it that way. Like, hey, that's the kid that's going to detention, and then you go there and what, you're supposed to be productive, or is it like, it seems like such a wasted time.
It is.
How are people supposed to learn something from
There's
that?
no rehabilitation in a detention.
But when you turn it into meditation, it totally flips the script.
Big time.
Now you're allowing that child to identify these ways of being self-aware to, what's going on. Learning those skills that you talked about very early on in their life.
Yeah.
I think is super awesome.
That is great. Hopefully, I would like to think that there's, someone that can kind of follow up with them, because, depending on the age of the child, they may not fully understand because they won't have an actual verbal mental language to go along with the physical body language to understand or articulate to someone. Because, if you think about a meditation in lieu of a traditional detention, you could have the child meditate on the thing that brought them into that place in the first place. So let's say they were cheating, they were on their phone, whatever it is that they were doing that got them in that place in the first place. You want them to be in there to be able to address what caused that. And so you need to have somebody help them understand and be able to grow past that and understand why they were acting in that way. So if the child's young enough or intuitive enough, they might be able to figure that out on their own.
Yeah.
And, further grow their meditation practice. But just bring it into the schools in terms of that versus a detention is huge leap forward.
Well, also if they're incorporating any kind of breathing work, because the breath is such a driver for a lot of these things I've found. Being able to, be able to be in control of yourself. And we talk about that, like mindful awareness and like control over your body, like getting into, yoga positions and stuff like that. A lot of them, you have to breathe into it. You have to use your breath to drive into those poses. And if you're not breathing, then it's not going to work. The breath is a powerhouse tool we've been gifted. And I think kids being able to learn that at a very young age is super cool. I think it's setting them up in a huge way to be able to utilize that. Because if you think about, let's say they got detention for getting in a fight or something, reacting. And, this kid poked me and I hit him in the face. And so, so much of breathing work is like, what, if you can get that into your life, I think it helps people from being very reactionary.
Reactive is actually a great word that you used. That's one of the things that I help people understand is, there's a set of situations or circumstances that come into your life, and there are two ways that you can go about it. Mainly two ways you can go about it. You can react to it, or you can respond to it. And respond is a connection to responsibility. Reactive is just, it's a very primitive, thing to do. But responding to something takes time. You need to think it through. You need to feel it through. That's where you'll have some of those lessons that we've all heard. Before you react to something, take 10 breaths, count to 10 and breathe. Some of these little isms that we've heard in our life, they actually do work. It's just, the ism is thrown out there and the why isn't. So people are a little dismissive of it. But there's a huge difference between reacting to a situation and responding to a situation. And being able to ascertain the differences between that and learn how to do that is exactly what you said. That all comes down to breath work, breathing deeply, breathing diaphragmatically, getting that air all the way in through the whole chambers of the body. Because remember that solar plexus, in the center of your gut, that is ruled by the element of fire. And so the more you can bring oxygen into that, you start feeding your own power, you start feeding your own will and your purpose, and you're going to start to change on the inside. So breath work has, a lot of different avenues where it's very advantageous for someone.
So I guess what does meditation look like to you? Because it can look like a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
It's interesting you asked that. I was having that conversation this morning with my husband over breakfast. Meditation, there's just like yoga, there's a lot of different styles of meditation. I think the most common that people are aware of is you sit and you learn how to breathe and you learn how to let go of thought. And a lot of people have a misconception that you're supposed to completely empty your mind. Mm-hmm. Well, you can't completely empty your mind. Even when you are asleep, your mind is still going. So it's never a matter of, I'm going to get my mind to shut off. It's a matter of let the mind keep working and don't attach to every thought that comes in. So that's really one of the more basic and well-known types of meditation. Mindful meditation, I think, is what we're calling it these days. I go more into a meditation because I can still myself pretty quickly if I need to. That's just, years of practicing that. And meditation is a practice. Yoga is a practice. It's not something that you just, I've done this for X amount of months and woo, I've mastered it. That's not how that works because every day is a new day. So the type of meditation that I like to work on is if I'm struggling with something, if I'm lost in something, if I'm trying to reach another level of something, I will focus on that in my meditation and I'll breathe into that and I'll see what comes. And, it's amazing the different things that will come. I mean, literally just flooding into my mind. And a lot of times I will try to keep pen and paper with me because so many things come in and I can't grab them all. Mm-hmm. And I do want to catch some of them because once I come out of that meditation, it's like waking up from a dream. You can't really remember it. And with every single blink, you lose more and more data. Yep. So I do try to write like little just keywords to bring myself back to that place. So meditation is really something that is about calming and restoring the body, getting back in touch with the self. But what I think is important and what can get missed is people aren't going to sit still for meditation if they don't energetically release from the body first. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think it's very important that people have some sort of physical practice, be it Tai Chi, a martial art, yoga, even just working out, running, riding a bike. Do something physical to get some of that energy out that's been clogged up in the system. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a lot easier to go through a meditative process than to just, okay, I finished work, now I'm going to sit down, I'm going to meditate. That might not work. Yeah. You got to purge. You got to get energy out. If you go through a yoga class, a lot of times at the very end of class, there's a pose called Shavasana, corpse pose. Mm-hmm. If you just went into a yoga class and just laid on the floor, you'd be fidgety, you'd be looking around, you'd be waiting, when is it time to go? But if you go through a 60 or 90-minute yoga class, by the time you get to corpse pose, you are so grateful to be in that pose that you are fully surrendering. That's how meditation should work. You want to get that energy out of the body first and then ready the body for meditation.
Yeah, and with practice, it becomes easier. Where I would say for me, I don't need as much of that stuff prior. Like I think you were mentioning it too. It's easier after doing it for years to be able to get into that sort of headspace, whatever you want to call it, the ability to be able to do that quicker without, having to do as much beforehand.
Yeah. Once you get more vested in your practice, you won't have the need to discharge as much physical energy to be able to sit in that position. Because a lot of people, they're not used to even just sitting Indian style or sitting on the floor even. The knees hurt, the back hurts, they start to slump. So, and that's kind of one of the aspects of yoga. Yoga is an eightfold process. The physical asana is 1/8 of that entire thing. Yeah. So, to just put yoga just as the physical asana is really missing a huge part of what yoga is meant to do for each individual. Meditation is another 1/8 of that aspect. So really being able to understand what all of those are and bring them together as a coexisting system is how you're really going to get the most benefit from it.
And it's not something somebody has to learn in a day. This is over
it's
time.
a practice.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that you can do your entire life. Yoga is something you could do your entire life.
I think some people have the same or approach meditation in the same sort of stigma way they would, or mental blocks that they apply to themselves as they view like getting started with yoga. I think I've never seen it from that perspective before, of like kind of letting people know, because a lot of times when I'm trying to help people, I have a tendency to be like, oh, well, you just do it. Like I'm not always the best instructor. Like I'm really good at teaching like trauma medicine.
Right.
Like I can deliver that very well. But sometimes when it comes to stuff like that, I think, it is important to let people know that, if they have trouble just like sitting down and getting into a meditative state, try working out like beforehand, doing something like that to get that energy out of the body. And like you said, doing a long yoga session is like a tool to get there. But that's a really cool point. And I think so, because I hear that a lot from people, like, well, I just can't meditate. Like I sit there and like, I have just too many thoughts, and like,
my body hurts, or I've got all these things to do.
Yeah. So I think I haven't thought to tell people that.
Well,
so
even when just before we started this, we both just kind of, shook out any energy that might be in there, so that you just go into, talking into this, foreign thing, with that thing looking at you, you don't want to go into it with that.
Yeah.
So, you just shake it off a little bit before you go into it that way. And it's the exact same thing. You're just discharging energy so that you don't have tension, so that you don't have anxiety, and it shuts this off a little bit, and it turns this on a little bit. It's just physical movement. Movement is life, period.
Yeah. Physical movement. So how long have you been physical training?
Personally, I started working out when I was 23 years old, and I'm now 48. So whatever math that is, you do that math, you do those numbers. When it comes to actually doing it as my vocation, I started in 1999, so 20 years ago.
Oh, awesome.
Almost to the day, actually. I know it was like late July, early August when I started, when I first got hired as a trainer. So yeah, we just hit a 20-year anniversary for training for money. So when I was working out just for my own personal workouts, people would come up to me and, hey, how'd you get your arms like that? How do you get, how do you? And I'm like, well, y'all keep kind of interrupting my workout, for one, but for two, for all this data that I'm giving you, I bet I could make money doing this. And so, next thing you know, I'm making money as a trainer.
Yeah. I would say that's something that I've noticed about Prism Yoga, and why I said you've sort of curated this over a long time, is I think you've been able to bring in some of those other modalities you've gained across your life into yoga that I think maybe some other yoga practitioners are missing. Whereas I think some yoga studios I've been to, or yoga classes, the yoga teacher maybe doesn't have the best understanding of like the physical makeup of the body, right?
Yeah.
They can do poses and stuff all day, but when they're talking about muscle groups and stuff like that, they're just like totally off the wall.
Yeah.
Whereas someone that like you, who's spent many, many years, not only working on your own physique, but the physique of others, you have a very like intimate understanding of the skeletal muscular structure of the body. And so I think that element of expertise, bringing that into a yoga practice, just like helps elevate it, if you will.
It absolutely does. A lot of people have some misconceptions about a lot of just individual asanas, postures. And so, some of the videos that I do, like I have one that's just on the down dog alone. So it's about a minute of just that pose, and it shows, step by step by step by step, what's going on with that particular asana. And it gives people a really deep understanding of how many muscle groups are really actually involved to get that posture done and done correctly. And it shows people what's unwinding and letting go, and what muscles are turning on and holding on for you. And the feedback that I get on that is tremendous. People are like, I had no idea that's how you do a down dog. I had no idea those muscles weren't firing on me. So I do try to break down what I call the ergonomics of yoga, the biomechanics of yoga. There's a math and a science to yoga. It's not just, my hips go here and my leg goes there and my arms go here. No, that has absolutely nothing to do with yoga. It's how you're moving your body, what things are turned on. Realizing that you've got 7 energy centers in your body and you want those things to be balanced. So you want to discharge excess energy, or you want to bring in deficient areas, some new energy. You got to know that this has to be open, not shut off. So there's a lot that goes into each and every single posture, and how you move through that is important. It's not just a matter of, I look like that person, but you might not actually be doing what that person is doing.
Yeah. I feel like that was the beginning of my yoga practice, was just like, okay, am I doing this right? And just like looking at the instructor, and I'm good at, that's the way I learn, is like seeing something done and then I can do it.
Visual, same.
But I would say once I started doing Prism Yoga, it like totally changed the game. I'm no longer looking at anybody.
Mm-mm.
It's almost like looking internally. It's almost like I can see the muscle groups and which ones I'm individually engaging. I've never engaged so many different muscles at the same time until I did Prism Yoga.
Exactly.
And it's cool, even though it's difficult at first. It gets easier each time.
Mm-hmm.
You start identifying ways to do it, and then remember to use your breath and all that.
Right.
But it's cool when you start realizing that you have that ability.
Yeah.
And it's something we've had our
Forever.
whole lives.
Yeah. We just haven't tapped into it.
You just haven't tapped into it. And so that's another cool thing about Prism Yoga. But yeah, so
I don't know that you've ever actually had a Prism Yoga class with me where I wasn't talking the entire time.
Yeah.
There's very little quiet space you get. If you've got the pose and you've nailed it, the only thing you're probably going to hear from me is every now and again reminding you to breathe, or making sure that this little thing is staying active. But for the most part, if it's going to be a newer group of people, I'm talking the entire time, because there's parts of the body that are already starting to collapse once this one started to come in. So if you're not keeping, all these 20 juggling balls moving all the time, then one of them's going to fall, then another's going to fall, and then another and another and another, and then pretty soon the whole thing just kind of implodes on itself, and then you stumble and you fall out of your posture. So I'm constantly guiding people through their practice.
Such a good mental stimulation too, to have to force your brain to juggle all those ideas, as opposed to just like, okay, I'm in this position and I can just kind of forget about what I'm doing.
Right.
Like, it's keeping that mental stimulus going, keeping the brain firing, like having to hold all those different not ideas, like all those controls of your body. Like you're
a pilot in a cockpit, flying a plane.
And the cool thing about our human bodies is we will run on autopilot. Like, our bodies want to survive. Yeah. People survive in a coma. Like, it's the body wants to survive, and so we have, the autonomic nervous system. There's all these things, like we breathe when we sleep. Like, you don't have to think about breathing to breathe.
No.
You just do it. And so your heart beats, without you thinking about it. But the cool thing about the human body is we really do have like this control center where it's running on autopilot until we take over the controls. And we can totally take over the controls in so many different ways. There's so many different things we can do. We can control our breath, even though that goes automatic. You can change your heart rate.
Yeah.
You can lower your heart rate. You can, speed it up. And it's that ability, I think, is really cool. And for someone like myself who has a brain injury, doing anything where I can get an exercise in attention and focus, something that's very difficult for me, especially when it comes to reading, looking at something on a computer screen, or having conversations. A lot of times is having difficulty with attention and focus. And so anytime you can get an exercise strengthening that is really good. So I've found that in sailing, doing tactile things,
right,
working in a garage, but doing Prism Yoga is sort of like the next level of doing that. It's being able to keep the attention and focus for 45 minutes to an hour or longer, and hold all those different controls in your head at the same time. So, I'm engaging this muscle, this muscle, this muscle all at the same time, and I have to like keep my hands on all those controls, figuratively in my brain all at the same time. And so it's not only a good like mind-body awareness, it's also good for the sort of brain injury side of things of an exercise in attention and focus itself.
Well, think about the one thing that forces you to do. It keeps you in the present moment. You're not thinking about your grocery list. You're not thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow. You're not thinking about what you did before Prism Yoga. You are not thinking about anything that doesn't matter in the present moment, because in the present moment, you're in your physical body.
You're immersed in yourself.
Yes. And that's one of the most magical things you can do to really start to heal not only the body and not only the mind, but again, now we're talking about that reintegration of the two. The mind and the body are working together to create a single outcome, and that's the body moving the way you are intending the body to move. And if you go into it with, I'm going to heal, XYZ while I'm doing this, then you're further, advancing your practice. If you're going in to just get a practice, that's great. Most of the time, that's what I'm doing. If I'm doing a yoga practice, I'm going in to do the practice. If I'm going in knowing, my SI joint's been a little wonky, or mentally I've been overstimulating the thinking aspect, I can go into a yoga practice and realize, okay, this is what I kind of want to focus on. And I'll turn all that attention to that part of my body, or those parts of my body. But at the end of the day, I'm still present moment. The mind isn't in control. The mind is actually in conjunction with the body. Yeah. It's very cool. It's very cool. That's where you can get that good release with your Shavasana at the end of the practice, where you can really fully let go.
Yeah.
Present moment.
That's a great way to describe that. As far as like recovery, I think one thing we haven't touched on yet is that you're vegan. So you're like fueling yourself with a vegan diet.
Correct.
Which also has tons of misconceptions.
A lot of misconceptions, yeah.
And I mean, if you look at yourself physically, like, I think a lot of people would look at you and assume that you weren't on a vegan diet.
Oh,
just
no.
Based
Most
off
people
of
think I'm a meat lover.
Yeah.
Not true at all. I actually started putting on muscle and holding weight far better than when I was a meat eater. So I always struggled to put on weight. And so I hovered in the 120s most of my life. And then 6.5 years ago, something like that, is when I had gone plant-based and my weight started to creep up. And it wasn't body fat, it was actually muscle. So my body, and I'm not saying everybody's body is this way, but chemically, my body is created to absorb the nutrition from plant-based protein far better than it does from animal-based protein. So, one of the big misconceptions that I bump into a lot is people just automatically assume I'm judging them. Oh, I'm sorry, Dawn, I'm having this burger. That's fine. Your lifestyle is your lifestyle. I don't want you to come in and tell me my lifestyle is funky. So I'm not going to come in and tell you your lifestyle is funky. Yeah. But I just know for me, this is far better for my system. It works. It feels better. My body functions better. So yeah, there are a lot of misconceptions. Most people think I should be, pale and 110 pounds, which just isn't the case.
How did you get started? Was it like into veganism? How did it come up?
It was, like most things in my life, quite accidental.
Mm-hmm.
I was having lunch one day. I was working on my computer. And I just kind of looked down at my lunch, and I was like, I'm like picking through the salad. I'm like, I don't think I've had any meat in like 2 weeks. I'm like, let's just go with it and see what happens. And here we are 6 years later. I'm still not doing that.
Yeah.
Now, when I first started, it was just very accidental. And I've followed my intuition my whole life. I mean, that's what's gotten me from A to B to C to D. I don't do a lot of, preconceived, well, I think I'm going to do this today. It's, I live very intuitively, very, go with the flow.
As do I. Yeah.
Exactly. So as I just trusted my body, I'm like, everything feels okay. So let's just ride this out and see what happens. I still wanted to do a little homework to make sure that I was getting the right nutrition. And once I realized, this thing's kind of sticking, so I might want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. Then I started going down these rabbit holes, and that's where I went from vegetarian to vegan rather quickly. So I was like, dairy, once I got back in touch with the body and remembered what I feel like after I've had dairy, I'm like, oh yeah, I do feel not great after dairy. So I omitted that. Eggs was probably the last to go. Now I will admit, I do every now and again, I will have, egg if I can trace where it comes from, but I don't eat food that has egg in it. So yeah, for the most part, I stick pretty true to it. But a lot of it just came down to realizing my body was telling me it didn't feel well when I was eating some of these foods. Yeah. And then I just didn't question it. I just followed it. It was long after that, probably 2 years after that, before I started really making that connection of, oh yeah, I really didn't feel good. I mean, the same was true when I was a smoker in my, teens and early 20s. I just quit one day. I'm like, I just don't feel very good. And, as fate would have it, when I had allergy testing, my biggest itchy spot was tobacco. So,
oh, wow.
It's just one of those things where, eventually I do go inward and I listen and I'm like, okay, well, maybe we'll just not do that one anymore. Yeah. So that's really how it happened. It was quite accidental. I followed my intuition, and here we are 6 years later.
I think sometimes people ignore their intuition, and maybe like they have an inkling about something, and instead of just trying it, they do a bunch of research that confirms why they shouldn't do it. Yeah. So I would say that following my gut and intuition has led me into some things that have been very like productive and helpful for my life. But yes, sometimes it was like messy starting out. Like yeah. But and I'm just kind of like you. It's like, hey, this seems to be working. Let me just see how this goes. But that is followed up by research of like, how am I doing this healthy? Like, how is this, like, how can I do this the right way? Right. And I think that's like an important distinction. It's not just the intuition is sort of what gets you started. That's the starting point. It's like the jump off point, and then it's up to you to figure out what works for you, because not everything's going to work for you. But if it's working for you, you're being healthy, and you do the research to make sure you're doing it in a healthy way. What's the problem? Because I think obviously there's tons of people who have very strong opinions about especially diets, like, and just the word diet has so many little connotations to it. Yeah, it's got stigmas to it. You tell somebody you're doing a specific diet and they think you're trying to lose weight. It's like, the diet is like what you're eating. It's not necessarily as... Yeah, diet doesn't mean weight loss. Diet means, the consumption of food. Yeah. I think on your Instagram you have like vegetable fueled or something, like on your... Plant fueled maybe? Plant fueled, yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a good way of putting it, is like what's fueling you. Like your body requires energy, and you have to break down something to create that energy. So what are you using for that? And then if you look at what is your body specifically tailored to like efficiently use for energy, because the body's good at like kind of making do, right? The body wants to survive. So if you're like, munching on this wood or something. You know, like your body's gonna like try and like break it down and like use it for energy. But I think a lot of people get stuck in sort of dietary like teachings, like the food pyramid, or
Oy vey, the food pyramid.
All these, a lot of people aren't willing to think outside of a box, or like a group think idea. Like if you're going against that, like you're crazy. Even if there's research, the problem with research is there's usually research that like backs up almost every side of it.
Well, I don't want this to be true, so I'm going to search this direction, and there's something to substantiate that.
A lot of it has to do with how the study was done and like what actual groups were they looking at. Is, you know, there's a bunch of different ways to do studies, you know, and it's okay to debate that stuff, right? But when it comes down to you personally, like, you can't go off of what other people are saying you should do with your body. Like,
no, my body, my choice.
And it's, if you find something that's working, find a healthy way to do it and do it. And, so that's, I would say, what else was I going to say about the dieting? I don't know. I forgot. But
we'll probably circle back around to it. I will say one of the aspects to the plant-based eating, I don't usually use the word vegan very often. Vegetarianism is one thing, but vegan tends to have more of a political connotation attached to it. So I tend to just go more plant-based diet, and then if people want to ask further questions, some do, some don't. But it's when you actually get down to the reality-based truth of it. I'm sitting down to a meal with other people, and when I'm not partaking of the foods that they're eating, they look at me like there's something wrong with me. Some actually will say, well, just eat it. What's the big deal? And I'm like, but, you know, the same thing's true with alcohol. If I go out and I'm not having a drink and everybody else is, they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, and so, you know, there's like this weird peer pressure thing, you know, and there's a lot of judgment and there's a lot of stigma. And, you know, I guess at the end of the day, luckily I have a constitution of, I just don't give a shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I'm going to do. If it makes you uncomfortable, that's your issue. You know, you deal with it. You can go sit over on that side of the table or, you know, whatever it is. But it definitely, once you put, you know, pen to paper and you're eating with people and you eat this way and it's very different from them, you feel it. It's palpable, the difference. So it's not always easy. And a lot of times I'll pre-eat before I go somewhere just to make things easier. Just like, you know, if I'm wandering around a party, I'll have, you know, I'll have a drink in my hand, but I'm not really doing much with it.
I just recently had to do an elimination diet for health reasons. And the same thing I would eat, because people aren't comfortable with,
they really aren't,
like, you not eating everything they're eating.
Yes.
And I knew that if we were like, still wanted to go out and hang out with people at a restaurant, but I knew, like, I would look at the menu ahead of time. I'm like, I can't eat anything on that menu. And because there's a very strict elimination diet, and so I would eat beforehand or like bring a meal to eat on the way home or something. And people just, they're like, you're not eating? Are you okay? Like, it's like, yeah, I'm way okay.
I'm totally fine.
Like, I'm the one that's in tune to what's going on, and I'm like doing something about.
That's what makes people uncomfortable,
yeah.
I think. Is someone is actually in tune, they're sticking to it, they are responsive to it and responsible with it. Yeah. And I think it's that more than the actual lifestyle itself that's triggering people's reactiveness. Yeah. Because there might be something that they should have a little more responsibility with and they're not. Yeah. And it's that bumps up against them more than this is what's on my plate and this is what's on your plate. Because at the end of the day, who cares what's on my plate and what's on your plate?
Exactly.
It's the constitution, the commitment, and the responsibility that I have to stick to something that I've chosen for my life. Because the one big thing I get with plant-based eating is, oh, I could never do that. You don't eat cheese? Oh, I could never do that. There's always this I could never. And I'm like, but have you even tried? Do you know what that's like? Do you know what that feels like? Have you walked in my shoes? There's all of these cascading things that go, flying through my head. And I'm like, well, why don't you just eat what you're eating and be fine with that?
Yeah.
And then I'll eat what I'm eating and I'll be fine with it. And we can coexist eating differently. It's totally fine. But I think at the end of the day, there's a commitment aspect.
I would say the only counterpoint to this that I see in life is humans being able to connect in some very common ways are over food. Mm-hmm. Like especially in a traditional sense.
Yeah.
And then music is sort of these like unifying factors that you could be in Afghanistan or like some place that's very culturally different and be able to have a common ground very quickly to be able to connect with people over food and music.
Yeah. Breaking bread is definitely a communal thing.
But for people I know to be like we are already connected, right? So if we're going out to eat, don't worry about what I'm eating.
Right, or not eating.
Yeah,
right?
like let's just hang out and talk. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Because it's the camaraderie and the connection that matters over food.
Yeah.
Not the food.
Right. But, I remembered what I was going to say is from having to do a lot of research on myself, from having chronic digestive issues and stuff, is I think a lot of the research that's emerging now is that people are individualistically made up, which makes sense, right? We're all different.
Yes.
We all,
thank God.
we all don't necessarily need to run off of the same fuel.
Right.
And sort of like stuck in this treat, this food pyramid or whatever, or the like, okay, something works for you. That's great. My body is different.
Right.
My microbiome, the makeup of the bacteria in my gut is completely different than yours.
Exactly.
So, I think people that are a little short-sighted when they take issue with other people's quote unquote diet or what they're fueling their body with. Like if it's working for them and they're healthy, like who cares?
Right.
Now, if somebody's like very unhealthy and, their health is declining, then maybe that's a sign like, hey, don't do what that person's doing, or maybe you need to have a conversation with them.
Right. But, well, and that's what's interesting is, if you're on your elimination diet, are you chastising that person for what they're eating? Because it's different from yours?
Yeah.
That's the juxtapose.
And they're like super overweight or,
right.
It's like, hey, I'm not...
But again, that's where I think
eating
it goes
yourself
back.
to death, and
right.
I'm actually doing something for my health. Like,
that's the commitment aspect. Yeah. You start seeing. Even before I went plant based, just being fit, working out, sticking to a diet plan, a food regime, whatever you want to call it. Even just that, going around people, they would have like this guilt shame thing around, oh, I'm having this dessert. And I'm like, I'm not judging you. I promise you. So yeah, just when there's a really strong tip in the differences between people, when those people are together, it's that difference that's causing the static as opposed to the actual literal thing that's going on. It's the undercurrent that's causing the issue. So that's where I usually just try to, be quiet, live and let live. You just eat your burger and I'll eat my, whatever I'm eating, and it's fine.
I think, some people are missing that self-awareness that they have the insecurities that come with eating that dessert, and now it becomes an issue for them that you're not eating, right? So it's really them and their insecurity that's sort of driving that difference. So maybe they need to do a little
checking in on the self.
Some
listen to the body's feeling.
The psychology.
The body psychology. Yeah.
Reintegrating mind and body.
Yes.
Maybe they need to become a little more
maybe
self-aware,
read up on that a little bit
and be able to get confronted by Dawn and where you're because hey, that insecurity, let's talk about it.
I've definitely gone there. I had a client recently, and she would come in and she would just berate me over how little weight loss she was getting. You know, she'd go into the weekend and she's like, I only lost, you know, whatever. Or I came in and I weighed the same as I did Friday when I saw you, and it's Monday morning. And I'm like, well, what did you eat this weekend? And the list that I got of what was eaten was just like, so, you know, and I was trying to help her. I was trying to, you know, talk with her, and she's like, well, you'll just never understand because you've never been fat. And, you know, granted, I've not walked in her shoes, and I am empathetic to that. But by the same token, you know, I've had my own battles with food. You know, being a recovering anorexic, believe me, I've had battles with food, and I understand the emotional connection to food. It might be different from, you know, someone who overeats versus someone who undereats, but the reason a lot of times is very similar.
Yeah.
So I finally just said to her one day as she's berating me, I turned around, I'm like, you do realize I'm a recovering anorexic? And I mean, her face just dropped, and she's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, I don't need you to be sorry, but I would like you to see that we have, you know, common ground here if you just let that guard down a little bit. And when you're ready to talk about the emotional reasons of why you're eating all that sugar, then maybe I can actually help you start losing weight.
Yeah.
About a month after that, she let me go.
Oh.
And that's going to happen.
Yeah.
That is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I don't take that personally. I know that some people just aren't ready, but what matters to me is I did my job and I planted a seed. She doesn't have to stay in my life forever. I'm not here to nurture that seed. I'm not here to harvest what comes from that seed. I am a seed planter.
Yeah.
That is it. That is my job. Any reason for me to stay longer than that is just feeding my own ego. So I plant the seed, and if they walk away, I, you know, peace.
That's cool. So that's where you find meaning in life.
Right.
Sounds like you want to make it a better place.
I want to be able to help the people who come to me looking for help. And if you're coming to me looking for help and it's coming out in destructive ways or combative ways, I have ways of talking to you. I mean, if I have 20 different people that speak 20 different ways, I have a language for each and every one of them.
Right.
That's just, you know, one of my gifts. So, you know, I kind of had a feeling that that person wasn't going to be in my life for very long. And even if I thought that she was, it wouldn't matter. I would still have addressed it the same way. And so I don't see her, you know, quitting working with me as a failure on my part. I actually see it as a success.
Right.
Because I triggered something and it caused a response, a reaction from her. Whether it was a response or a reaction, that I'm not real sure. You know, cutting off the relationship is reactive, but how she's going to respond to that later on, that's what I'm hoping sticks sometime for her. In 6 months, in 2 years, in 15 years, whatever it is, hopefully some part of what we discussed will resonate.
Right.
That's ultimately what I'm here to do with Prism Yoga.
And was it reacting, or was it responding to your intuition that sort of like led to that?
Yes, I definitely, I trust the words that come out of my mouth. When I have friends, when I have clients, when I have students, when I have, you know, anybody that comes to me needing something, I trust the words that are coming out of my mouth. And, you know, what I'm going to say to this person and how I deliver it is going to be very different from what I'm going to say and how I'm going to deliver it to this person, even though it's the same message.
Right.
So intuitively, I can quickly learn people's language and understand what the best way is for me to penetrate through that wall and reach them.
Cool.
So again, there's a whole, you know, foundation and building process for that individual. And I might just be, here's some cement.
Yeah.
Good luck. You know, and that's my role. My role is not to sit there and nurture that whole thing.
Right.
Again, that's just ego feeding.
Right.
So I do my part, and when they go away, and then another one comes in, and another one comes in, and another one comes in. And that's the way the cycle goes.
Yeah. Man, this has been awesome talk.
I know.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of topics.
Yeah.
A lot of topics.
Yeah. I'm feeling like kind of just wrap this one up.
Yeah.
But yeah, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about? Anything that comes to mind?
No, I don't think so. Did you feel that you got a good understanding of the reintegration of body and mind? I feel that you did get a good understanding of that.
Yeah. No, I'm trying. I think you are sort of uniquely placed in that you've physically trained and done training of people in many different environments where you're coming across a lot of different type of people, right?
Yes.
Whereas some people, I think, tend to be singular group focused, where I'm dealing with like this group of people, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I'm just saying it's more just pointing to sort of your ability of what you were just describing is there's a reason you're able to sort of meet somebody where they're at, like kind of from wherever.
Yeah.
And you're able to quickly adapt and be able to deliver something appropriately and trust what you're saying is having that, seeding effect, no matter who the person is.
Yeah.
And so that's all it was kind of like running through my head is that, that's just me sort of assuming that's sort of where that may be tied to a little bit, but
yeah, definitely. Everybody's got their gifts, and it's important for people to understand not only what the gift is, but to really dig deep and understand how to implement it and know what the stopping place is. So me knowing that I'm just a seed planter, but that is my job. I plant seeds and then I move on. So if you think about somebody who's planting seeds, you can cover a lot of ground, but if you have to sit there and you nurture that thing up out of the ground, you're going to be there a lot longer.
Yeah.
So I can cover a very broad, big area quickly with the skill set that I have.
Yeah.
And I know, okay, this is when we're done and we move on. I don't linger there.
Yeah.
So that's really, if I could say to anybody who's, trying to kind of hone their skill or their craft or their avocation, really dig deep, understand what your true purpose is, and don't go beyond that. Don't try to make it more than it is.
Right.
Just honor what it is and really, really refine it.
Yeah. So it sounds like pretty much Prism Yoga is for everybody.
Prism Yoga is for everybody. I mean, even me developing Prism Yoga has healed a lot of the wounds of the past for me. So it's been, a very cathartic process for me to go through this. So, you talking about the curating of Prism Yoga. Yeah. It's been 18 years of my life, and, who I've become over those years is, I look back at it and it's almost staggering to look back at, who I've become in all of these phases and who I'm still going to become as it keeps unfolding. Cause it's a practice, it's still, whether I'm the founder or I'm teaching it or I'm taking it or whatever, I'm still just like anybody else that I'm teaching. I'm still learning as I go, so it's not a finished product. It's a practice.
Yeah. So cool. Let's go over where people could find you again one last time.
You can find me on Instagram, Prism _yoga . No, that's not a dot.
No, yeah.
That's not a dot. Facebook is going to be the same.
Prism _ yoga.
Yeah. And then the website is prism-yoga.com.
Awesome.
There is the YouTube that's just been created. So if you just type in Prism Yoga, that should take you right to that channel, and you'll be able to see, more full-length videos, whereas Instagram and Facebook are going to be shorter versions.
Cool. So make sure you all check that out and give it a follow and subscribe if you're interested. So,
yeah.
Awesome. Well, Dawn,
Daniel.
good friend of mine.
Yes.
It's been awesome having you on.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Look forward to the next time we get to sit down and have a good discussion. Awesome. Thanks for joining me. Later.
Bye.